Title this World War I Part 4, also the Treaty of Versailles. So where we left off, we were just talking about some of the actions, the Schlieffen Plan, which was Germany's plan to avoid a two-front war, the First Battle of the Marne, trench warfare, the stalemate that incurred because of the new machine guns and things like that that pinned our troops down. There's a picture of the machine gun. No Man's Land, I talked about that. Italy, as we said, started on the side of the Central Powers or the Triple Alliance, and then when the war broke out, they actually will come over to the Allies kind of for a better deal. The Eastern Front is a little bit more movement than the Western Front. Not such a stalemate, but the casualties are very much higher, especially on the Russian side, which in turn leads to the Communist Revolution, 1917, led by Vladimir Lenin, and will actually get them out of the war. Lenin will deal with the Germans, and it's called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March of 1918, which takes the Russians out of the war and finally gives the Germans what they have been trying to get all the way back to the Schlieffen Plan, is that one front war. And this just happens to be when the Americans come in as well. Here's a great picture of the diagram of the trenches from World War I. You can see here, this would be the no man's land here, front line trench, a communication trench, another support trench, and then even a reserve trench. And these could be very elaborate. You can see a dugout. Some of the ones that have been there for quite some time were multi-levels underground. And then there's also some that were just kind of like dents in the hillside. So it just depends on how long they were there. The more elaborate ones were the ones that were pretty much stuck on the in the Western Front. And as we know, once the race to the sea ended, the outflanking maneuvers, they were pretty much there for about 4 years. So, all right, war actions continued. In the fall of 1918, there are 2 million American troops in France. And perfect timing at this point because the Russians have now left the war effort. So we're going to see a lot of action in this time that the Americans were there. A lot of movement on the Western Front. They call themselves the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, led by this man here. There you go. General Blackjack Pershing. Here he is. The nickname Blackjack, okay, was actually because he led an all-African-American regiment, and it was called the Buffalo Soldiers of the Spanish-American War. And they'll actually have Buffalo Soldiers participate in World War I as well. But he will be the leader of the American forces in World War I. Now they will actually be under Marshal Ferdinand Foch. And Marshal Foch will be, gotta be careful when you say that name, will be the French commander, but he will lead all Allied troops at this point. Okay, so he will be the Allied commander of all the troops, and he will lead these last few months of the war. And the doughboys, and here's a picture of what our soldiers look like. That's what everybody called our soldiers. Now, there's a lot of reasons why they could have called them that. Some believed it was because they had a little bit more money. Some believed it was because of their rations, their food that they brought with them, including bread. And that's probably the most acceptable answer there. It's because at this point in the war, we were very well supplied compared to all the other troops that have been going at it for almost 4 years. So our guys come in all very well supplied, food, rations, and everything. That's going to help turn the tide of the war. Now, this next portion, okay, we'll have the second battle at the Marne, also called the Battle of Reims. And this was actually started as a German offensive, okay? And at the Battle of the Second Marne, we actually will win. The Allies will push back the Germans, and then they will start their own counterattack. And this is going to be the beginning of the end, okay? The Second Battle of the Marne is considered the beginning of the end of the war. This was the last German offensive. And from here on out, they're going to be basically backpedaling, okay? The Allies then launch a three-pronged attack, okay, at these locations: Château-Thierry, Sedan, which is also in the Argonne Forest, and the Battle of Verdun, okay? The Château-Thierry is one of the first actions by the AEF, okay? The U.S. will actually help stop the German advance at on Paris. This is just outside of Paris. And then from here on out, they'll be pushing forward. Like I said, it was a three-pronged attack planned by General Marshal Foch of the French. And in 50 days, the Allies will take about 28,000 prisoners. We also see our first war hero of World War I, Alvin York. Sergeant York. There's a movie, an old movie about him. And wins the Congressional Medal of Honor. What he did here, he was actually against the war. He was drafted but went and fought. And he would actually kill 25 Germans and capture 132 prisoners by himself when he attacked a machine gun nest when his fellow soldiers were pinned down. So legends are written about this gentleman, and obviously for good reason. Now, we're not involved in this thing for very long, okay? Like I said, the beginning of the end was there. So we're going to get to the Armistice next, and we're going to cover this here. And that brings us to your essential question for this lecture, which is going to be number 3 on your goal sheet. How did the peace process lead to more conflict? How did the peace process lead to more conflict? So that's something I want you to think about as we go through this next section. Okay, the Armistice was actually signed the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, November 11th, 1918. It was actually signed in a railroad car in France, and that's going to be significant later when Hitler comes into power. And that's part of the attraction of why this peace process was so messed up. And Hitler will use this peace process to actually gain power. And we'll see this same railroad car pop up when Hitler conquers France. He actually makes them sign their surrender in the same car. And that's very significant because of this. And then he'll have the car destroyed. So it is signed in a railroad car in France. Okay. It was immediately the Germans were supposed to evacuate east of the Rhine River, which is that river that kind of borders France, or it does border France and Germany. It returned all POWs and renounced the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which was that treaty they signed with the Russians. So they had to evacuate those areas as well. Now, it's important to note that when Germany agreed to this armistice, Kaiser Wilhelm II has already stepped down. He is not in power anymore. There's a provisional government in Germany that is in power. And this provisional government wanted to stop the war. There's actually a lot of infighting going on between the government officials. But for the most part, they were ready to back down. But they didn't want to give up everything. So they actually agreed to stop fighting according to President Wilson's plan of peace, which were the 14 points, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, so, just to sum it up, President Wilson's plan was peace without victory, meaning, hey, let's just stop fighting, we'll go our own ways, and we'll figure out so this doesn't happen again. So there really wasn't a clear winner or loser, according to Wilson. And we're going to see how that changes. But you got to remember this. You wonder why Germany was so upset afterwards. Okay, they agreed to stop fighting according to Wilson's 14 points. And as we see in the treaty, things will change very drastically. Okay. Now, there's many people that were invited to the Treaty of Versailles, but the most important are the big four, and some will even say the big three, but we'll say big four here. Obviously, President Wilson with his 14 points, which we'll go over in a second, he wanted peace, okay? And most importantly, and make sure you put this down there, peace without victory. In England, okay, Great Britain, they wanted, there's President Woodrow Wilson. England had a different point, okay? They wanted revenge. David Lloyd George was the Prime Minister of England at the time, and they wanted revenge, okay? They also were a little jealous of things that were occurring. Germany kind of overstepped them in production as of 1900 in Europe, okay? U.S. did as well, but they wanted the power back in their hands in this region. So they wanted revenge. They wanted to make Germany weak. That's important. France, Clemenceau, where is he? There he is. Nice mustache. They wanted, I made this word up, mega revenge, okay? And you can't blame them. You got to look, we look back at this as a huge failure, the Treaty of Versailles, but you got to put yourselves in France's shoes, okay? They've been invaded twice in 50 years, Franco-Prussian War and now World War I, and we know what's going to happen in World War II. So they wanted mega revenge. They wanted Germany to be weaker than they've ever had. They did not want to be threatened by Germany ever again. So not only did they want to weaken their military, they also wanted to weaken them economically. Because, once again, France wanted to step up and be a world leader. And then Italy, and a lot of places you'll see them actually leave out Italy, but Vittorio Orlando, he wanted land. Okay, they were actually promised land for switching sides. So that's what they want, and we're going to see how that's going to affect Italy too. Okay, that was the big four. Now, here are Wilson's 14 points, and you'll see how this works out, okay? Basically, the 14 points are going to be ignored, okay? But let's look at these. Number one, the end of secret treaties. Okay, that was a big thing. No more secret treaties, according to Wilson. Part of that was Italy and Bulgaria and things like that. Let's put everything out on the table so we know where all allegiances lie. Freedom of the seas. That's in direct response to the unrestricted submarine warfare. Free trade. Let's open up free trade all over the place. Okay, there shouldn't be any competition. Reduction of arms. If you don't have a strong military, if you don't have a strong standing military, you're less likely to go to war. Adjust colonial claims, meaning let's try to make that equal. And then 6 through 13 is self-determination and borders of all these lands. You know, Austrian Empire has dissolved. The Ottoman Empire has fallen apart. Let's let those areas determine for themselves instead of us or other countries stepping in and taking over. You know, let's get rid of that imperialism. And then lastly, the General Associations of Nations, the League of Nations. Now, as you probably know, there's only one of these that really survives, and it's the General Associations of Nations. The League of Nations is the only one that lives. Okay? So all that is being done. Germany basically surrendered and stopped fighting because of Wilson's plan, but one point survives, and that is the League of Nations. Everything else is pretty much ignored because Germany didn't have any say in this. Okay, so it is led up to England and France, and they want Germany so weak that they will never threaten them again. And they win out in the Treaty of Versailles. And so Germany is absolutely punished for their role. Okay, here are the provisions set forth. Germany is totally disarmed. Germany was allowed to have a small navy, maybe of 10 ships. They were allowed to have around 50,000 men in their army, which is nothing. So they were basically totally disarmed. They weren't even allowed to build airplanes and things like that. In fact, the companies Mercedes and BMWs, if you look at their emblems, okay, they're actually propellers. They were airplane manufacturers. During this time, they'll switch over to cars, automobiles, because they weren't allowed to build airplanes. Germany lost all their colonies. Boom, just taken away. Gone. France gains land on the border, the Rhineland, which is this rich, fertile ground right here between Germany and France. And just so happens when Hitler takes over, one of the first places he takes over is the Rhineland. He occupies it. We'll talk about that later. Germany had to, and this is important, Germany had to take full blame for the war. Okay? Now, if you look at this, was Germany behind it? Sure. I mean, were they pushing Austria-Hungary into the war? Absolutely. But, I don't think you could just say it was totally their fault, but they're going to be blamed. And then they had to pay war reparations. $30 billion of war reparations. If they continued to pay, they would just be ending their last payment. I believe it was last year. So somewhere in there, in that time period. And this just destroys the German economy. Okay, new countries created: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. And that leads to a whole new realm of nationalism in those areas. People weren't happy. One day they're German, next day they're Polish. So you're going to create all these other problems that we've talked about in those areas. We actually never even joined the League of Nations, even though Wilson wanted us to. We never joined. Bottom line, this is the major cause of World War II. The Treaty of Versailles is the major cause of World War II. And that's the bottom line of how this failed. That is all. Oh, casualties. Sorry. Teased you. The country that took the most casualties would be Russia, okay? And then on top of that, we'll have a pandemic flu. 50 to 100 million dead because of that flu. Pandemic is worldwide because everything was so torn down from the war. But there's the casualty list. I would never ask you these particular numbers, but I do want you to know that the country that took the most casualties would be Russia. Okay, that is all. Stay classy, Vandalia.